I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen bee.
The banquet hall had been prepared for a final night of royal grandeur, but one chair carried more power than every crown in the room. When Princess Sophie entered beside the king and calmly took the place reserved for Camilla, conversations died instantly. Camilla had not merely been moved down the table. She had been removed from the monarch's side at his final banquet, and everyone present understood that such a decision could only have come from Charles himself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had chosen this as his final state banquet before stepping back from ceremonial duties. A state banquet is a royal dinner honoring foreign leaders and displaying national unity. For the king, it was meant to be a farewell. For the crown, it was supposed to prove that the family remained stable and united before diplomats, courtiers, and relatives who understood every hidden signal. Sophie walked beside the monarch with measured calm, yet unease tightened inside her. Hours earlier, Charles had signed a seating order, placing the trusted confidant in the chair traditionally occupied by his wife at his right hand. That instruction was a direct command governing who would sit closest to him. When Sophie lowered herself into the chair, she understood that obedience had made her the public symbol of another woman's humiliation. Camilla stopped beside the place assigned farther down the table. Her eyes moved from the altered card to Charles, searching for a denial. None came. The king sat without meeting her gaze, and the silence between them became more brutal than any rebuke. She had spent years fighting to stand beside him. Now one signature had pushed her away before the people meant to witness their unity. A senior equerry approached without drawing attention. An equerry is a royal aide who assists the monarch during official duties. He lifted Camilla's place card, slid it into a leather folder, and carried it away rather than discarding it. Sophie noticed. So did the queen. The act revealed that the change had been formally recorded and preserved. Charles rested one hand beside Sophie's chair. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Remain where you are, whatever happens next." She looked toward him, startled by the warning, but he offered no explanation. Then the first course arrived. An aide handed Camilla a folded note. She read the opening line, raised her eyes toward Sophie, and let the bitterness show. The chair had already changed hands, but the true battle would begin only when Camilla discovered why Charles had chosen Sophie to occupy it. To the guests, it appeared to be a brutal change in royal hierarchy. To Charles, Camilla, and Sophie, it was the culmination of years of loyalty, disappointment, and private sacrifice. One woman had stood beside the king through scandal and triumph. Another had served quietly without demanding the spotlight. Now Charles had placed them on opposite sides of a decision that could redefine both women and expose what the monarch truly valued at the end of his reign. Sophie had never built her royal life around attention. She had accepted difficult engagements, traveled abroad when others stepped back, and represented the crown during periods when public confidence had begun to weaken. The crown was not simply the monarch's headpiece. It meant the institution, duties, and authority surrounding the royal family. Through every difficult season, she had become one of its most dependable figures, trusted because she worked without demanding praise. Before entering the hall, Sophie had turned to Prince Edward and admitted the truth. She did not want Camilla's chair. The trusted confidant feared that sitting beside Charles would make her appear ambitious, even disloyal. Edward saw the strain in his wife's face, yet he reminded her that refusing the king in public would wound him during the most important evening of his final chapter. Sophie listened, steadied herself, and walked forward. Camilla carried a very different history. She had endured years of hostility, judgment, and doubt before finally standing beside Charles as queen. That position carried more than marital closeness. It carried ceremonial authority, the visible right to appear beside the monarch during the most important royal moments. Being moved away from him was not a simple seating change. To her, it felt like every hard-won victory had been erased by a single place card. William noticed something others missed. Each time a foreign guest addressed the crown, Charles looked toward Sophie, watching how she responded, how she listened, and how calmly she carried the pressure. The prince understood that his father was doing more than rewarding loyalty. The king was testing whether she could become a stabilizing force during the transition ahead. Catherine learned the full truth when William quietly told her that Camilla had not been consulted. The princess immediately understood why. Charles had feared that his wife would block the arrangement before the doors ever opened. Then Camilla saw a familiar palace advisor greeting Sophie. She recognized him at once. He was the same official who had witnessed a disastrous private confrontation weeks earlier. To understand why Charles risked shaming his own wife, the palace would have to return to the moment when Camilla crossed a line the king could no longer ignore. The final banquet had not been transformed by gossip, jealousy, or a sudden royal impulse. The decision was born 3 weeks earlier, during a private rehearsal dinner at Windsor Castle. That evening, Camilla believed she was protecting her position. Instead, she challenged the king in front of the one woman he had begun to trust with the monarchy's fragile future. By the time the doors closed, Charles had seen something in his wife that he could no longer dismiss. Charles had arranged the private dinner to settle the final details of his farewell banquet. Only Camilla, Sophie, Edward, William, and 2 senior advisors were present. They were there to review seating, speeches, and diplomatic duties, the formal responsibilities involved in receiving foreign guests and representing the country with authority. The meeting was meant to remove uncertainty. Instead, it created a wound the family could not hide. The king's strength had been fading, and he knew the full welcoming address might be too much. He asked Sophie to deliver part of it on his behalf, trusting her to speak with warmth without making the moment about herself. The request was practical, but it carried deeper meaning. Charles was handing her a piece of his voice at the most important event of his final public chapter. Camilla reacted before anyone could soften the decision. She reached across the table, took Sophie's prepared speech, and placed the pages directly in front of Charles. Then she declared that no other royal woman would speak with the authority of the crown while she remained queen. The crown, in that moment, meant the monarch's public power and the institution built around it. Sophie quietly reached for the pages. Camilla pressed her hand down and refused to release them. The trusted confidant pulled back rather than create a scene, but humiliation tightened her expression. Edward saw it immediately. His face hardened as he watched his wife being reduced in front of the king. Yet he remained silent, because one angry word could have shattered the meeting completely. Charles asked Camilla to remove her hand. She refused. Then she accused Sophie of positioning herself as a replacement. The monarch set down his glass with deliberate control and told his wife that loyalty was not ownership. The room fell still. Camilla rose and left without another word. After the door closed, Charles asked Sophie to remain. With the advisors gone, he admitted that the monarchy needed someone who could serve without turning every duty into a struggle for status. Before leaving Windsor, the king requested the final seating plan, took up his pen, and drew a line through Camilla's place beside him. 3 weeks later, that crossed-out name returned to haunt her as she prepared to confront Sophie in the middle of the king's final celebration. The orchestra continued playing, the candles remained steady, and hundreds of guests pretended not to notice the storm gathering behind the banquet doors. Camilla waited until Sophie stepped into a private corridor between courses. Then the queen followed. There were no photographers, no applause, and no polished smiles. Only 2 women, one stolen moment, and a question sharp enough to cut through years of royal restraint. How long have you known you were taking my place? Sophie had left the hall only to breathe. The attention had become unbearable, and every greeting from a foreign guest seemed to deepen the wound unfolding farther down the table. She knew Camilla was watching. She felt it in every pause, every strained smile, every moment when the room seemed to measure one woman against the other. Camilla entered before Sophie could steady herself. A footman moved toward them, but the queen dismissed him with a sharp glance. No witness would stand close enough to interrupt what came next. She told Sophie that obedience had made her arrogant. Then she accused the trusted confidant of accepting a humiliation that no loyal member of the family should ever have allowed. Sophie did not retreat. She explained that she had learned of the final seating order only hours before the banquet. The chair frightened her, she admitted, because it carried more than status. It carried ceremonial responsibility, the formal duty of standing beside the monarch and supporting his public role. Yet Charles had personally ordered her to remain, and she would not abandon him during the final evening of his public life. Camilla's anger hardened. She revealed that an aide had delivered a copy of the king's handwritten instructions before the first course. One line stated that Sophie must assume the ceremonial responsibilities of the monarch's consort if the queen disrupted the banquet. A consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch, expected to support the sovereign during official duties. The words changed everything. Sophie realized that Charles had anticipated more than resentment. He had prepared for Camilla to leave, challenge the seating, or force the evening into open crisis. That knowledge wounded her, but it also gave her clarity. She told the queen that the choice still belonged to her. Camilla could return with dignity and stand beside the family in another way, or she could prove exactly why Charles had prepared someone to take over. Camilla stepped closer. She warned Sophie that the chair carried obligations she did not understand and consequences she would not escape. Then William appeared at the end of the corridor. The prince carried a sealed folder bearing the king's authority. The confrontation had exposed the wound, but the document in William's hands would reveal who possessed the power to make the change permanent. The palace had expected emotion. It had not expected a signed command. Inside the folder carried by William was a directive bearing the king's seal, witnessed by 2 senior officials, and written with a clarity that left no room for reinterpretation. Charles had not simply altered a banquet arrangement. He had defined who would stand closest to the crown during his withdrawal from public life. And in doing so, he had placed Sophie at the center of a future Camilla believed belonged to her. William led both women into a small receiving room, while the banquet continued beyond the closed door. Charles remained with the foreign guests, refusing to let a private family conflict become a public collapse. The prince understood why that mattered. One visible fracture at the king's final banquet could turn a farewell meant to project stability into a spectacle of resentment. William opened the folder and read the directive aloud. A royal directive is a formal written instruction issued under the monarch's authority. Charles had prepared it after the Windsor rehearsal dinner, giving Sophie responsibility for supporting him throughout the evening and representing his wishes, if failing strength forced him to leave early. Camilla listened until the final sentence, then demanded to know whether William had encouraged the decision. Her question carried more pain than accusation. If the future king had chosen Sophie, then the removal was not merely Charles's judgment. It was a warning about the order that would follow him. William chose his words carefully. He had not selected Sophie, he said, but he would uphold his father's command. The crown could not survive another public battle driven by personal entitlement. Camilla stared at him, recognizing that he was no longer speaking only as a son. The prince was already defending the monarchy he expected to inherit. Sophie asked whether she could surrender the responsibility now that the banquet had begun. She wanted the tension to end before more damage was done. William refused. Charles trusted her precisely because she had never sought the position, and abandoning it would turn that trust into another humiliation for the king. Then the prince revealed the second clause. If Camilla left the banquet or openly challenged the arrangement, Sophie would accompany Charles during his final departure from the hall. That honor would make the replacement impossible to dismiss as a temporary seating change. Sophie looked toward the door, shaken. William then admitted that Edward had witnessed the king signing the order. Her husband had known everything but remained silent, fearing she would refuse before the evening began. Camilla closed the folder herself. Her anger disappeared behind a chilling calm. "I will return to the banquet," she said. When the queen walked back through the gilded doors, she carried no document. Yet every measured step promised consequences for the family seated inside. Camilla returned smiling, but the smile convinced no one. She crossed the banquet hall beneath the gaze of diplomats, courtiers, and relatives who had already sensed the fracture. Instead of taking her assigned chair, the queen stopped behind Sophie. For several unbearable seconds, she remained standing beside the king's table, as though waiting for someone to correct the insult. Charles did not move. Sophie lowered her eyes. Then Camilla placed one hand on the back of the chair. The second course had just begun when she reached the head of the table. Her movement was quiet enough to avoid an open spectacle, yet William, Catherine, Edward, and the senior aides understood exactly what she intended. Camilla was not returning to accept the new arrangement. She was testing whether Charles would enforce it in front of everyone. Sophie remained seated, because the king had ordered her not to rise. Beneath the table, she tightened her hand around the edge of her napkin and fought to keep her breathing steady. The trusted confidant could feel Camilla standing directly behind her, close enough to turn one royal command into a public confrontation. Camilla leaned toward Charles and asked whether he truly intended to end their final banquet with his wife treated like an ordinary guest. Her voice was controlled, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. The king answered without looking away from the table. The evening, he said, would end according to the arrangement he had approved. Sophie turned toward him and quietly offered to exchange seats after the formal address. She hoped mercy might prevent further humiliation. Charles stopped her with a small movement of his hand. Compassion could not be allowed to destroy the decision he had made, especially after Camilla had already challenged it. The queen straightened and announced that she felt unwell. She would leave immediately. A senior aide approached Sophie at once and handed her the ceremonial departure schedule, the formal order governing how the monarch would leave the banquet. The second clause of Charles's directive had now been activated. Camilla began walking away, expecting footsteps behind her. None came. The king remained seated. Instead, he turned to Sophie and asked her to begin the welcoming address. Her first words carried across the hall before the doors closed. Camilla heard them clearly. Alone in a private antechamber, she removed the bracelet Charles had given her years earlier and placed it on a table. The anger that had carried her out of the banquet suddenly gave way to something far more dangerous: grief. Then the door opened. Charles entered without guards, advisors, or family beside him. The public struggle was over, but behind that closed door, the king and queen would finally face the private truth neither had dared to speak. For the first time that evening, Charles and Camilla stood alone. There were no titles in the room, no diplomats waiting for a toast, and no advisors prepared to soften the truth. The queen's bracelet lay between them, like a symbol of everything they had survived together. Camilla expected anger. Instead, the king spoke with exhausted sadness. He told her that Sophie had not taken her place as his wife. She had taken the position Camilla had made impossible for herself to hold. Camilla sat beside an untouched glass, the anniversary bracelet resting near her hand. Charles closed the door himself, cutting away the palace machinery that usually stood between royal duty and private pain. An institutional buffer is the layer of aides, officials, and protocol that protects senior royals from direct confrontation. This time, there would be none. The king looked tired, but he refused the chair she offered. He wanted to remain standing, to speak plainly, and to keep control of a conversation that had been delayed for too long. Camilla told him she had endured decades of hostility to stand beside him. She had accepted judgment, scandal, and public rejection because she believed their shared journey would one day be honored. Now, at the final banquet of his public life, another woman had been placed where she had fought to belong. Charles did not deny her suffering. He acknowledged every sacrifice, but he said fear had changed her. What began as loyalty had become a need to control everyone around him. He reminded her of the rehearsal dinner at Windsor, when Sophie reached for her speech and Camilla held it beneath her hand. The trusted confidant had been humiliated for accepting a duty she never requested. The king told his wife he could not reward cruelty with ceremonial power. Ceremonial power meant the visible authority carried through official position, public duty, and proximity to the monarch. Then he revealed the truth Camilla had not expected. Sophie's role would end when the banquet ended. She was not becoming a new consort, nor was she replacing Camilla within their marriage. Her position was symbolic, a final lesson that service must come before possession. Camilla asked the question beneath all her anger. Did Charles still want her beside him when he left public life? Yes, he answered, but only if she could return without challenging Sophie or turning his farewell into another contest. Camilla picked up the bracelet and closed her fingers around it. She asked Charles for 1 minute. The monarchy had made its decision, but Camilla still had one final choice, capable of changing how the entire night would be remembered. By midnight, one image had traveled beyond the palace walls and across the country. It did not show an argument or a humiliated queen. It showed Sophie seated beside Charles as Camilla returned to the table and placed a steady hand on the Duchess's shoulder. The gesture lasted only seconds, yet it transformed the meaning of the banquet. Britain saw surrender, forgiveness, and succession compressed into a single frame, and every newspaper understood that the crown had entered a new emotional era. Camilla returned before Charles delivered his final toast. She passed the chair assigned to her and continued toward Sophie, creating a silence that spread across the hall. Guests stopped speaking. William watched closely. Edward barely moved. No one knew whether the Queen had returned to challenge the decision or accept it. Camilla stopped beside Sophie and rested one hand on her shoulder. The trusted confidant stiffened, waiting for the confrontation she feared had only been delayed. Instead, the monarch's wife quietly told her to finish the duty Charles had entrusted to her. Sophie looked up with relief and thanked her. The exchange lasted only moments, but it carried more authority than any official statement. William turned toward his father and saw the tension leave his face. Charles had feared that his final banquet would end with bitterness dividing the family before the world. Now the peaceful ending he had almost stopped believing in was unfolding beside him. The prince understood that Camilla had not surrendered her marriage. She had surrendered the struggle for control. Edward watched Sophie continue the final address. She fought to hold back tears, but her voice remained steady. His hands stayed tightly clasped as his wife completed the most difficult public duty of her royal life. She had entered the evening afraid of appearing ambitious. She would leave it recognized for carrying responsibility without seeking victory. The next morning, the Crown Chronicle published the photograph across its front page beneath the headline, "The chair changed, the crown endured." The image became a national symbol because it captured something the public rarely witnessed inside royal life: pride giving way to duty. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered as broadcasters replayed Charles's final toast. Buckingham Palace is the monarch's main official residence and a public symbol of the institution itself. When a large screen showed Sophie rising beside the king while Camilla applauded from farther down the table, the crowd fell silent. Then sustained applause broke out, yet Charles had not finished. Palace officials confirmed that he had requested one final family gathering after the guests departed. There, he would explain what Sophie's chair truly represented. The public had already chosen its symbol, but only the family would hear the king's final verdict on the women who defined his last banquet. After the final guest departed, the king returned to the banquet hall with Camilla, Sophie, Edward, William, and Catherine. The candles burned low, the flowers had begun to droop, and the disputed chair stood empty. Charles looked at the place that had divided his family and delivered a truth none would forget. The chair had never been a reward for rank. It had been a test of whether those closest to the crown could place duty above pride. Charles gathered his family around the abandoned table and ordered every aide to leave. He wanted no palace machinery between them. The crown, meaning the institution and authority surrounding the monarch, could issue commands through officials, but this judgment belonged to those who had carried the pain. The king turned first to Sophie. He said she had been chosen because she accepted responsibility without demanding recognition. When the monarchy needed steadiness rather than competition, the trusted confidant had served without celebrating Camilla's humiliation. Sophie answered that she had never wanted the queen's place. She accepted his gratitude only for the family and duty they shared. Camilla then faced Sophie without anger to protect her. She admitted that fear of becoming irrelevant had made her treat the Duchess as an enemy. The Queen apologized for the Windsor confrontation and acknowledged that Sophie had protected Charles's final evening when she could not. Her words did not erase the wound, but they ended the battle. Charles reached into a folder and returned Camilla's original place card. He had preserved it because her role in his private life remained secure. Yet the king made one truth unmistakable: no royal position granted anyone the right to diminish another person's service. William and Catherine listened as Charles confirmed what would follow. Sophie would take on expanded responsibility supporting them during the transition, but she would not inherit Camilla's title or permanent ceremonial rank. A ceremonial rank is a formal public position within royal duty. Camilla would remain beside the monarch in retirement, separated from the operational authority she had tried to control. The final banquet was never remembered as the night Sophie defeated Camilla. It became the night the crown separated love from power. Sophie proved authority could be carried without hunger. Camilla learned that belonging could not be protected through possession. Charles ended his public chapter by choosing duty over comfort, and the monarchy emerged disciplined, reconciled, and ready. When the family finally left the silent hall, the disputed chair remained empty behind them, its purpose fulfilled, its judgment delivered, and its power forever understood. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.